All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor, Theta, our local designer, Norman Rafferty, and our good friends and GMs, RedRabbit and Lesson Learned. When it comes to tabletop role-playing games, I've been playing, running, and fixing problems for 15 years at the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Lessons, you go.
Yes. I've been playing role-playing games for over 20 years. I run a game for these fine fellows. Some of the fine fellows here. I run Iron Claw in the past, and I'm running 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons Into the Wild Coast, a Greyhawk adventure or adventures. I published my first book over Amazon called Night and Stars. It's a speculative fiction stuff, and you can find me streaming whenever possible here on YouTube and on Twitch on the Listen One on Twitch and under Lessons Learned on YouTube. My pronouns are he, him.
All right, Red, go ahead and go.
Hey, I'm RedRabbit. Pronouns are he, him. I'm also running our Wednesday Iron Claw game here on the channel, and I love tabletop role-playing games. I play a bunch of them, and I like to experiment with new systems and weird stuff. I consider myself a student of narrative design and of game design.
All right, and Rafferty.
Hello, world. I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him. I work for Sanguine Games. I also would like to think of myself as a student of role-playing. It's always awesome to learn new stuff.
All right. So, for today's subject, there's a lot of prep work that can go into starting up a tabletop role-playing campaign. And GMs have to set up their plots and settings and put all that together, and players need to hash out a lot about their characters. For a lot of games, this process can be a little intensive and take a matter of hours, and if everyone's got to do it, you may as well all do it together and give each other a hand, or at least let everyone know what you're bringing to the table. So today we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the Session Zero and what planning does for playing. So, you know what, Red? You're the expert here. You're the vampire GM. We're gonna hammer that.
Damn it.
All right, but
other games.
But as one of our local DMs, so what do you feel about Session Zeros? Tell us about your experiences and how they work.
So, I like the concept of Session Zeros. I am pro Session Zero. I guess I would have to be honest and say that firsthand, many of my Session Zeros become Session like 0.5s because I have found that, I found that a lot of people really are eager to play the game, myself included. So as much as I enjoy having a Session Zero and hashing everything out, once you do all of that, it can kind of... You've got a lot of anticipation and energy built up. So something that I personally like to do is have some small thing prepped, even if it's just like an introductory encounter, specifically to give people a chance to show off their characters, to get into the mood and the style of playing the game. But I do think that Session Zeros are important. I think they're being embraced more and more universally in the text of many role-playing games because I think...
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. Help me out here. What is, for the benefit of our audience and for what you're talking about, what is a Session Zero?
So Session Zero traditionally is it's a meeting between the game master and all of the people who are going to be playing in your game. And usually it is used as a time to talk about player expectations, about the game expectations, like what kind of world and setting you're going to be playing in. And it's also an important time to do group collaborative character building, which is something that is kind of hard to do, especially when you're playing pickup games with randos on the internet. But I think it does. I think it makes a much more coherent play. Yeah. But yeah, what do other people think? That's my take on what a Session Zero should be.
Because I just thought of I mean, as you, like, I know we're all like-minded people, so I'm funny agreeing with you because you also said turns into a Session 0.5 because I mean, that's not what I would define a Session Zero as, because it's like if we show I would define session 1 as we show up, talk about what characters we play, because I mean, I'm an old school gamer. It used to be that, or many cases, when people showed up at the table and said, "Hey, I'd like to play D&D with you guys," and they said, "Well, we already have, what do we need?" Well, it didn't matter. You rolled, and whatever you rolled is whatever you were playing today. Because if you don't roll 15 in your dexterity, you're not playing a monk today. You would roll, see what it is, and play out. Not that I'm saying we should have that, because I thought that was terrible. But usually when a session 0 is one where people spend a lot of time planning. And one thing I would have to identify here is like, I'm against this, and the first reason why I'm saying against this is, do we really need all that planning to be a murder tourist? I mean, like, it's Dungeons and Dragons. What are we doing here? Where whatever I'm writing up, it's going to be a person who gets into combats and kills things for money. How much planning do we need?
Well, that depends on the game you're playing. That depends on the play. Like,
if I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, why do I need this?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a little more planning in more modern editions, like 5th edition, where you can, you got to roll the numbers, of course, but you can also select your stats, and they're like, oh, hey, we need a healer. So who wants to be the healer? Who wants to be this? Wants to do that? And that can get things, everybody on the same page, right?
Well, I'm going to once again be devil's advocate here, because I hear you say, well, we should plan our party so someone's the healer. So when you play a modern game of D&D, does that happen? What if no one plays the healer? Because I have been in many games where no one is playing a healer.
Yeah, I mean, that can also happen as well.
Right, but then at least the group is aware of and consents to that idea.
Yeah,
isn't that a failure of session 0? Is session 0 where you make someone be the healer?
Well, I think the idea isn't like to force people into roles. It's to have everyone aware, like, hey, we're not going to have one. Are you all cool with that? And if someone's not cool, they can say, well, I'm not cool with that. I'll play the healer then, because I really wanted one to be here.
And I also think, like, do we have to devote a whole session to that?
So I think that what you're talking about, Raph, is very specific to Dungeons and Dragons. You're talking about and actually so far all the things that we have spoken of have been mechanical. Who's going to be our healer, who's our DPS, which is fun from a gamist perspective, but I don't think is the most important things to be discussed during a session 0.
Right,
that's true.
And I'm with you, but I like just interrupt there. It's like, yes, we're talking about, well, maybe games like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and games like that don't need a session 0. Pause. Those are the most popular games on the market, possibly 50% or more of what's out there. So I would agree with that. Let's kind of table that and say, well, what if we're playing a game that's going to have more planning? Like, for example, like Vampire is one of the ones to talk about. We might want to decide what city are we going to be in, and what is our vampire clan like, and what's that going to be like. We might not want to play it one of the prefab cities. We might want to customize it, or we might be playing a game like an Apocalypse World or a Wicked Ones or something like that also invites you to go ahead and make the setting that you're going to be in. So I think that's a cool idea. But the one reason why I'm against the idea of session 0 is I wouldn't want to show up at a Dungeons and Dragons game, me personally, show up at a game like that and have a big session where we talk about all these kinds of big lofty ideals, and then we play it and it's just D&D. It's just
right. You don't want to be disappointed here, which is understandable.
I
appreciate everyone sitting down and listening to what my character concept is, what my hopes and dreams, and what I want to see happen in the game. But then, from what I've seen, that's not what you actually do in Dungeons and Dragons. We get all these people like in the comments saying like, "Oh, my game is like that." It's like, okay, that's why I need you guys to sell me on this or whatever, because it's like I understand you might have a game like that, but D&D doesn't have any provisions to reward any of that, and it's written in a way to assume that you just walk in as a bubble and go into dungeons and kill things. It's written; it doesn't reward you for doing it.
I think that's probably a good point to start with. Dungeons and Dragons does not have a rule for Session 0. There's nothing in there that says this. And Session 0 as a concept, I believe right now, is a very informal thing that people do between each other because there's a need that they want, and they are choosing to fulfill that instead of adhering to the rules and just saying, well, we're just going to go straight into it.
Well, and I want to emphasize by saying, like, I don't believe you shouldn't talk about your characters before you start playing.
Mhm.
I agree with that. I've been in places where people spend 1, maybe 2 entire 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 hours of game time just planning what we're going to do. Okay, and like, and you know, people tell me they don't want to spend an hour shopping in the game. That bores the crap out of them. Imagine coming to the game and spending 3 or 4 hours and you didn't even play.
Okay, I think we need to step back a little bit, because I think one of the reasons in the past, particularly with Session 0, it's wanted to solve a problem where a lot of this stuff was GM fiat. I.e., the GM says, I bought this box set for this campaign world, or I spent the last 10 years designing my own homebrew game. Here it is. Play it. And the players were like, yay or nay. That's it. Oh yeah, okay, let's go with it. And that's it. Or the pitch that the GM would give is like, oh, you're going to be doing all this stuff. Or the game system says you may be doing all this stuff. But then when you got to play it, you couldn't fulfill those promises.
Well, I mean,
Session 0 is designed, I think, when done well, not only to talk about characters, but themes, ideas, the rules of the table, how the conversation goes, right? The spirit of it, right? You don't solve everything, but it starts getting the people in the same wavelengths or parameters, right?
I remember a time where 4 or 5 people will show up to a table with 3 to 4 pages of backstory, put it on the table and say, this is all of my stuff about my character, and then it goes in the garbage because nobody knows anything about it and nobody's going to ask while they're playing, so it never gets incorporated. Your backstory didn't matter. With a Session 0, you don't got to write that all out. Just tell people this is kind of what's going on, and then they have that thought in their head, and that's it. And that takes 30 minutes to an hour. And I think like the key concept to all of this is familiarity.
I would definitely.
And there's those three. There's 3 parts that you want to be familiar with. You want to be familiar with the rules. If it's a new game system, everyone's got to sit down and figure out what the hell's going on. And maybe you only got 1 book. You know.
Well, see, that's where I want to stop you right there, because if you play like a modern video game or whatever, they often have the in-game tutorials. They don't make you sit down and watch a 3-hour video explaining how you do that. The exception of this being League of Legends. So
no, this is true.
I mean, like, really, in order to find out how the game actually works, okay, like, I'm going to drop my big bomb here. It's like, okay, have any of you ever said this? You have to watch 3 or more episodes of the show before it gets good.
Yep, we've all heard that before.
Have you said? Yeah, but have you said? I don't. What now? And why would someone say that? Why would that be a truth? What does that mean?
Because usually what if we're going to talk about like shows? Usually like what's the first episode you call it? The pilot is usually a demonstration of the idea, and then the idea needs some time to warm up and the ideas to mature. Right. That usually is kind of what happens.
The actors have to figure. I've heard this about like Star Trek, which confused the hell out of me. It's like it's a 50-year-old history, but we still have to it's going to take 2 seasons before it gets good. And the logic here being that we have to wait until the troupe work together and, you know, learn their ins and outs and what this is going to be about and and most importantly, what's working for them, what's their chemistry and that sort of thing. This is where I'm against the Session 0, because the Session 0 isn't going to help you with, like, I hear where you're coming from when you say, well, we need to know the warning signs in and outs, but I don't agree that a whole session spent discussing this and planning this helps out as much. I think you really learn by actually playing the game. Like, most people are just going to be bored or not listening, like, or, you know, they're in school mode.
True.
And they're not getting this to Session 0. You need to get it. Like the Session 0.5 I can get behind of discuss what we want to do and then play like an hour of the game to see how it works. That I can get behind. But an abstraction of we need to plan everything out beforehand. And then suddenly you play the game and discover how it works.
Well, here's the part I'm talking about.
It's not working.
here's the part I'm talking about. If I want to start playing Fantasy Flight Star Wars with my friends, there's an 8-step process to create a character, and they have never seen these rules or dice before. We have to at least figure out how to put the numbers on there before we get playing. So we have to at least have that session 0.5.
Okay, I think
So
there's a
your
couple of
session
assumptions here. Yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, but that's why I said session 0 isn't. Well, I mean, I would say two things.
Doing the paperwork.
I'm going to say something here and then immediately contradict it. First of all, ideally, the purpose of the rule book was so that the player could read the rule book, understand it, and make a character and then play it. Now, I'm going to contradict this by saying, like, well, most games are written too complicated for people to understand. We call those games bad.
Yeah. So I think
send your hate mail to me, by the way, if how much you hate my stuff.
Yep.
I'm seeing something happen here.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that session 0 means something completely different to each of us, I think. I feel like everybody here has stated, that a session 0 is something different to them. I want to be, now that I've had a chance to hear and to contrast, I want to be clear about what I think is important for me in my session 0, so that we can maybe come to some sort of definition of what we're talking about and what we think has value. For me, the most important thing for session 0, as someone who likes to run games that I'm new to with people who are strangers from the internet, who some of them also are probably new to the game. You have a collection of people whose only exposure are these rule books, and they have taken whatever it is from that rule book that has made them excited to play. They all have their own expectations. I have my expectations. I think the important thing for session 0 is to make sure that everyone gets those expectations out, and everyone is very clear about what the other perspectives at the table are, so that we understand ourselves. I could say, hey, I'm going to run this game of D&D, sign up and we'll start playing. And then you could get there and I'll be like, hey, we're playing Dark Sun, which means there's no metal, and you guys could very easily die if you fail a survival roll. And one of you guys has made like a psychic dragonborn using the psionic rules, and someone else is playing a high elf. They want to play Lord of the Rings. And so it's very important for me that part of the process, even if it's not a whole session, is to just make sure that everyone approaches the idea for the setting of the game from the same perspective with the same expectations.
Okay, yeah, and here's where I want to say, I agree with pre-planning, but a session 0 would be a session where you have not even decided what the game is. The game master has not even decided what the game is going to be about yet. The session 0 is where all the players sit down and hammer out details, not just about their characters, but also about what the world and the campaign is going to be about.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah.
So,
I mean, my example might have been a little bit tainted, but like,
familiarity with the people you're playing with and what you guys are about to do. At some point, people need to know this is part of our communication through line.
Right, and in fact, communication. This is another thing I want to clarify here. It's like you're saying, like I'm going to run D&D, and everyone shows up, and then you told them it was Dark Sun. Like I could see a GM doing that, but a session 0. By session 0, we're talking about stuff that everyone had to be here at the table to do. Like, for example, I could say, I'm going to run Dark Sun, character tree, build 3 characters. We are only using the canon books, and that's it. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we could have a session 0 where you build your characters, but everything I just said in those few sentences, you should, in theory, be able to grab those books, go through those books, and design your character, spending hours doing so without any supervision or input. Because
I agree.
I totally
I feel like I need to defend myself here now too, because that example makes me look like a jerk. But
I'm on your side. I'm actually on your side because I said in theory. Now in practice, the problem is that people will still find ways to build characters that aren't appropriate. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm like, they'll do something.
In my defense, I don't actually, as much as I might want to run a Dark Sun game. I've never successfully done it because I don't show up to the table saying, hey, this is what we're running today. What I do is I go and say, hey, I had some ideas. What do you guys think? Would anybody be interested in a game where your swords break?
Right,
And everyone says, fuck off.
This is a friend group.
Yeah, no, I'm with
this is
you.
not just a friend group. This is strangers. This is people on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you've advertised your game with very specific things, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you've advertised, hey, we're using like the hardcore 5e rules by Runehammer, presumably the only people who are going to show up to that Discord invite are people who already have that kind of buy-in. But
Right.
I agree with what you're saying, Raph.
Well,
that,
but I
like-
want to clarify, like, this would be different from, say, a Vampire or a Dresden Files campaign, because, like you said, I'm going to run Vampire. You could easily say, well, we should have a session 0 because Vampire assumes you're all part of a power block in a city. So we should spend time discussing who your characters are and what your place is and what the city has and what certain resources it has. I can see that where that requires more planning. And that way we can decide, you know, what it is you want to get out of the game, because a session 0 is more valuable with games that have more softer or fuzzier goals. Like with the strength of Dungeons and Dragons is we're going to go murder things and take their stuff. And all the material, there's gazillion material that all supports that. But if you want to play something that's a little like stranger, like Vampire or Urban Shadows, or Blades in the Dark or something like that, that's going to be a little more, you know, have a little more organization and planning. That I could see having a planning session. But I mean, I'm going back to the thing I'm arguing about, which is I don't think sitting down and telling players what we're going to do works that well, because I think that, first of all, many players are inarticulate. They can't explain very well what's going to happen. And I also think that players learn more by doing than they learn by being, you know, sitting there and being told. Like, I don't know how much what your GMing style is. Like, I've never been to a session 0 where the game master explained to me their style of play before we even got started. And that's why I think
that's
that as a tool.
I think that's a problem of the particular game, but also can be a problem with the rules as well. Because you mentioned there are games that are more cooperative in the way the game is put together, i.e., you get to make more decisions about, you know, I don't know, maybe decide that you're going to be like a Traveler. It's like, oh, we're going to play Traveler, but there are many ways to play Traveler, at least theoretically. Are we going to do a Deb run? Are we going to do a, you know, we're agents of a specific power? Are we just, you know, what are you going to do? And you can approach this 2 ways. You can say, I'm the GM, I'm going to roll Traveler. Traveler is about, you know, you're in a lot of debt. You're going to do all these missions in order to keep the bank off your back. Or I just want to play Traveler because I like the systems. It's a space-based sci-fi. What do you guys feel within these rules so that we can play? And if people start,
well, you're not talking about the creative side of it. Like, are we going to invent? Like, normally when you come to a game, the only thing you're allowed creation over is your character, and that's it. But in games like Vampire or Ars Magica or Blades in the Dark or something like that, you'll have an installation that will already exist in the game that has resources you can take advantage of, and a social situation around it that could be anywhere that isn't defined. Like when you say, I'm running Greyhawk today, I know what that is. And if I don't know what that is, I can be outside your game and read up on what that is and go, oh, that's for Yandi. You know, so yeah, I can do that. But if we're doing a session where we're going to make everything up, this is a made up kingdom or a made up city that already doesn't have clans and that kind of stuff in it. And there are games like that, like some Apocalypse World games, Ars Magica being one of my favorite games, have sessions where, okay, we're going to decide what's our coven like, what materials do we have, what resources do we have, what sort of thing. That kind of session 0 I can understand. And that's where I would be pro with it. Like, but what I'm hearing here, like when I'm talking about negative kind of stuff, is I can understand that you might want to do a lot of planning, but I'm not in agreement where these modern game, you know, like these popular games like Dungeons and Dragons and Traveler and that kind of stuff. I don't see why we have to have a lot of talk about what our characters are going to be like beforehand. And also we admitted the problem here, which is a lot of these games a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Traveler isn't rewarding you for a session 0 because it doesn't have provisions for a session 0. Whereas a game like Vampire or Ars Magica, which does have provisions for a session 0, and like you should do this and decide your city and decide this. And we even gotten into, like, I have to mention this, it used to be in the 80s and 90s, we would play games like GURPS or Fudge or Fate or that sort of thing, where we even had to agree on what rules we were going to use in the first place. Like, that's not even something I've even seen here, but that's because many modern games don't do that anymore. They don't have a lot of long lists of, we're going to use critical hit rules, or we're going to use like this magical rules, or pick Savage World's magic system. I don't
there was
see
a bit
that
with 3.5, I think, but that I'm glad
you guys
it's
don't
gone.
you guys don't seem to play this. Well, 3.5, they had the big checklist on Unearthed Arcana. These were all the variant rules we use. I don't.
All the variant rules, all the different books.
Sorry,
Okay,
I would argue
me-
that I think 5th edition very much works the exact same way. If you consider how many rules are,
There's actually
there are
a lot of
variant
content now,
rules.
isn't there?
There's a lot, but not even that though. If you look in the main book, a lot of rules that I think people take for granted are actually like variant rules that appear in sidebars. There's also a lot of variant rules that make a lot of sense that some people think are, milestone or XP, right? Milestone or point-based experience, flanking, encumbrance. Like, people cut out and include huge rules from D&D 5th edition. It's part of the reason why it's so popular, because it could literally be two completely different games.
Right, and I have a 100% agree on you, but the reason why I'm against Session 0 is that will not come up. If you go to a game that advertises as Session 0, they'll spend a lot of time talking about their characters and maybe about setting up the campaign and stuff. But the problem is, if two people have two different interpretations, like everyone says, or I'm fond of saying, everyone says they're playing D&D, regardless of whatever game they're playing.
Right.
So the problem is when the fish don't see water, my interpretation of the use an object rule might not match someone else's use an object rule, but that's not going to come up during Session 0. That's going to come up during 0.5 or 1 when we actually play the game and I actually say, okay, I put my bow away and stab him with 2 swords. That's when that comes up during the experience of the game. And that's why I said it's a weakness of the Session 0, because it's not like 3.5 Unearthed Arcana, where I'd hand you a list which check marks rules that we're using and not using. Instead, this is going to be, I don't know how the game actually works until I sit down and play it with you for a session or two to understand your style. And that's why the Session 0 annoys me, because it's taking time away from that. I would rather play a session or two to decide if I like the game. The Session 0 is a lot of work for me to plot the game before I even know how the game is actually going to play.
I actually agree with you, Raph. I thought I was going to be dead set against you on this one, but I see your perspective.
I agree with you. I agree with you that it's a good idea to talk first and then play. I think that's that's our middle ground.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the best I can do in defense of my method is say, well, if you're in my Session 0, that is the kind of stuff I talk about. Probably because I've had a lot of experience getting into fights at the table over those kinds of rules. And mostly because I want to avoid situations where people feel like I am springing rules on them. So my Session 0s probably aren't that exciting. And maybe that's part of the reason why I want to get playing as fast as possible, because I feel guilty. But I do try to bring up a lot of that stuff. I like the idea of a checklist. That's how sick in the head I am. But yeah.
Well, I thought those games fell out of favor because, like, hey, you guys want to play Rollmaster?
Yeah, I like the Session 0, and also I think one thing you have to do is the Session 0 should not be considered universal, right? Again, not all systems and not all.
It's a very informal rule, right?
It's a very formal rule that is being adapted. Some games formalize it, some games don't care. But also, I've been in a lot of situations where there is no Session 0. Everybody says, "Oh, we're playing Greyhawk" or whatever. And everybody assumes that everybody else knows what they're talking about. You sit down, and first section, second section, third section, the problems start happening. It's like, oh, but I thought we were going to do this. It's like, but we never talk about this. You're making assumptions based on what, when nobody articulated anything.
And that's why
Session 0 can doesn't necessarily give you. It has the possibility of giving you a chance to, like Red said, clear that out of the way, but it is no guarantee.
Right. And that's why our games formalize that process. Like with Iron Claw, it's like everyone introduce yourselves. By the way, mention your goal list of what it is the hell you want to do. Because, that's the opposite of what I've seen in these games where we'll spend a lot of time planning. And then when we show up at the table, no one's actually told anybody, this is what my character actually does. Like we've forgotten by now. I've spent 3 or 4 or 10 hours or stuff offline reading books to figure out my character that I forgot who all the rest of you are. And then the other thing that we formalize is the freaking debriefing, which is where after the game we spend some time talking. Because here's the number one reason why I hate Session Zero. The reason why I hate Session Zero is it assumes you will never have players appear or drop out. Because what do you do when a new player shows up? Do you do another session of nothing but explaining the game to them or finding out where their role is in the game? Do they not get to participate in the world design because they weren't there?
I mean, I think there's ways to
part is
integrate.
complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want the core of your group to understand this, because then hopefully they can help you. Said you're the GM, they can help you. It's like, don't worry about it, GM. You keep running. I can take a moment to talk to this new player because we're all on the same page. And so what I'm going to say to them is not going to be very different from what we already have established.
Well, I need to establish here that I'm being formal at this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about session. I'm going to define session as table time when we are all present and all talking to each other. If it's anything you're doing away from the table, that's not part of a session. And the reason why I'm making that distinction is because that's also a question of how much investment you want to do. Some people show up at the gaming table and have never read a freaking rule book. They're just here to have fun. That's fine, but that means they have they don't know the rules. And if you yell at them, are you using session 0 to teach them the rules, or are you going to tell them go read the book? That's a decision for you. And it's also like, are you doing ex parte stuff where someone says, I want to do and set my character up in a background story that's away from the table, it's only personal to me? That's fine if you want to do that. Aaron Olston called that blue booking, the process of, because he would use little blue books because it was for the computers, where you write down all the stuff that you wanted to do and do that kind of stuff, like it's play by mail. That's fine too. But once again, that's not at the table with everyone present and trying to be entertaining, and especially on the stream. And I think while I think those are good things, and you should be doing them, I want to point out those aren't part of session 0, which is why I'm arguing, why would we need session 0 when we could spend time talking away from the table? And then I'll punctuate all this by saying, it's also a game. Some people don't find all this work to be fun. Some people just want to show up and play. And so all this talk about session 0 and blue booking and all that kind of add-on stuff is going to reduce some people's enjoyment.
I'm gonna agree with you, Rafferty, and actually play the game before you make some of these decisions. I was looking over at the Power of the Apocalypse, especially Dungeon World, and one of the things it has is questions for the players. Especially, there's some questions that our other characters are supposed to ask about each other players, like, which character are you close enough to? It's like, when I read that, I went like, you cannot answer that until at least the first session is over. Because you haven't played the characters. The characters don't exist until you play them. And therefore, if for example, you start playing and you're, two friends are buddy outside of the game, but when they start playing, this character betrays another character. I mean, in game, not outside, nothing personal. You then, when you go to the question, is like, I thought this person was my buddy, but now they're not. How can I be justifying? And the rule says, well, you can change that later, but you know how people do bookkeeping, they just forget. It's like, especially when they have a bonus, right? If you give them a bonus, they're like, I'm going to try to do everything in my power to keep this bonus. I'm not going to change this because then
Dungeon World, Apocalypse World has a relationship tracking thing. And for some reason, that's also the experience point growth. Where how you relate to each other is very important. But Apocalypse World's also very much get in there and get dirty immediately. First say it, then you do it is one of their tenets. I think that's kind of that's a weakness of that's kind of what is nailing on the head for me. It's like Dungeon World is one of those games that spends a lot of time saying you should spend time talking to other players and solidifying your relations, which all sounds like good advice. But then it's Dungeon World. It's like it's the kind of thing where we are what really matters is what we're doing in the game. Like setting up that I'm good friends with somebody, like how is that? That's not necessarily rewarded. That's kind of like it's all this kind of soft stuff. Like that's what I'm kind of getting at here. So the session 0 seems to be like a lot of stuff. When all of you tell me that, or no, sorry, when people tell me that we have to watch a few episodes or wait until season 2 until this gets good, what we need to do is we need to have a continuing process where we're design our characters, preferably together in a session 0.5, but we don't do session 0 and then stop, like Lessons just warned us about. We should have a continuing process going on where we're discussing, okay, how is your character going? How do you want it to change? That sort of thing, and build that into the game. That's what I can think a big reason why I'm against session 0 is because it sounds like we conceive everything. Okay, everyone knows all the rules now. We're done.
Well, I think we have to challenge it. It's like I think I'm going to challenge the idea that session 0 is supposed to cover all this, right? Think of session 0 as the kickoff, which, depending on your take, the kickoff doesn't require session 0, and you can go straight to the first game and start there. Or for some other people, in some situations, it might require a little. And I say little because I think also spending 3 hours might not be. Usually, in my experience, session 0s is that they're short, right? If I'm sitting on a table, I could say, okay, we're playing this other game, but let's spend the first 15-20 minutes preparing for the next campaign I'm working on, because we try to jump from one campaign to the next. Or at the end of the night, we played that game. It's like, okay, we ended early. We got half an hour. We're gonna need to the new campaign, so we're already here. Let's make the characters together. Let's talk about it, and then go home. And then next session, we roll into the next campaign.
No,
right?
I think we're all in agreement that spending some time meeting with each other, discussing a couple things before we get started, I think we all agree that's a good idea. But I think we're also in agreement that you're really not going to learn how this game works until you play it. So we need to get in and get playing. So we need to do, like, I'm totally with Red on this, the session 0.5, the get in, discuss with each other, get some ground rules set up, make sure we, get any big issues out of the way, like saying no evil characters or whatever house rules that you have, get those out of the way. But then let's start playing to see if our styles gel. So when, we'll stumble over rules, find out we interpret things differently, find out how we work together. And I think we all agree that it needs to be a good continuing process too. So I think we're all in agreement here that we should let the play and the planning work hand in hand as a continuous process that we revisit from time to time, and not too much of either of these.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the way I'd probably like to end this off, if as we are reaching the conclusion of the debate portion of our program here, is so we've covered what it is, what people want it to be, or why that's maybe a problem. So we have a set of things that the session 0 is trying to do. So Rafferty, as a designer, what would you put into a game so people don't feel like they are obligated to run a session 0 or like they need to work everything out? What would you put into design?
Really, I think the thing that we all were saying was the power of the rule book is how much of it you let the player read and interpret on their own time. I think if you have to come to the table to figure out how the game is actually going to work, your rule book has been weakened severely. Like, why does it exist? There are lots of people who come to modern games who don't even bother reading the rule book, either because it's a game and I'm here to have fun and reading isn't fun, or there are a grizzled veteran who knows that the rule book doesn't matter. What only thing that matters is what the GM says are house rules and what's going to happen. So none of this actually matters. I'm just going to come to the table and hear what you have to say. And all of those are weaknesses of design. The strength of the game, like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, is they spend pages explaining to you what an half-orc is or a dragonborn. I mean, like they don't just throw you in the deep end. Didn't you notice that all those class chapters begin with 2 pages just explaining what this is?
Yep. At some point, someone has to figure out what a paladin is.
In theory, aren't we reading these? Because I know as a designer, people complain when I don't include them. So it's like, in theory, I'm coming to D&D because I don't have to explain what an elf is. You know they're shorter and weaker than humans, right? We all saw Lord of the Rings, where elves were shorter and weaker than humans, right?
But then there's the person who hasn't seen it.
Right. But I mean, but the book explained that to you. It said, no, you have a
Yes.
con penalty for being an elf. It's D&D. Shut up.
Mhm.
Like vampire is a huge example of this. I'm not supposed to show up at the vampire table not knowing what Malkavians and Bruja and the rest of those guys are. I'm supposed to have read the book before I showed up and know that, oh, sunlight kills us. It doesn't just make us sparkle. Like, I'm supposed to know that. So and vampire, to its credit, does a really good job of explaining all of this. Every clan has enough detail of it, and they explain your relationships with other clans. They have a questionnaire before you even show up, asking, who are you? Who sired you? What are your beliefs, dreams, motivations, favorite color, favorite character on Friends? All this stuff already in there to get you to make your character so you can show up fully realized at the table and immediately plop down, and start playing with other people, up to and including a LARP where you just show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a designer, I would say that, but you have to make the game accessible. Like, a big problem we're all talking about is some of these games are so badly written, or just clunky or too long. Guilty of these as designers too, that people can't get into it. That's why you're seeing a lot more games that are designed to be a lot more immediate. Especially what I'm loving is the character sheet that has your powers right on it. Like, that's what people love about Dungeon World or Blades in the Dark. This sheet tells me who I am and what I do. And so I don't even have to read a rule book or anything like that. I can show up, check off a few boxes, and you all know what I'm on about.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is minimizing the time and immediacy. A good designed game will get the purpose of the game, period, is to get all of us on the same page before we even get started.
Yeah.
And the game should be responsible for doing that. I think we determined that 5th edition, probably most editions of Dungeons and Dragons, have not been stellar because probably as a function of how complex and scattered or like divisive the rules can be, but also probably it has a lot to do with the size of the audience.
Well,
at a certain point.
I know I bash on D&D a lot, but I think like D&D, first of all, manages your expectations, which is what people are chafing against. Like, you have a lot of people who are getting mad of, all orcs have the capacity for evil. And it was like, people are going, why does it say that? It's like, it says that so we can shut you up and you can kill orcs because they're all evil.
Yeah.
And people are questioning that. So on the one hand, D&D is good at saying, no, you're all murder tourists. You all wander around and kill things, and that's what you do as a band of guys. And then people are saying, well, what if we weren't murder tourists? And the problem is like, that's when you're running the problem of the game. I think D&D is really good if you don't expect anything else.
There you go. Zero expectations. No, but you're right. D&D was created as a game to serve a very specific kind of genre fantasy purpose. The chafing is that it markets itself as a game that could be anything that you could dream up, and it is being marketed to an audience of people who don't have that nostalgia or baggage, who believe it when they say, it is the most expansive role-playing game ever made. And so...
All right. And lessons. What would you like to conclude on, do you think?
I mean, in design, I think you can, in fact, design let's rename this so we don't get back to you can design into an introductory session into your game. In other words, as part of character creation, as part of the introduction of the book, I think we go back to something we tried to say in our episode, which is part of the problem is how you talk about the rules. You have teaching the rules and not simply saying, okay, if you have this, admittedly roll dice and add this. It's also, okay, these are examples of how you would do an introduction, right? GM, you're going to probably be the person who's going to be teaching this rule to other people. How about if you do this? How about you sit down and you introduce the characters and you talk about, the type of characters that they're here, etc. You can write that into your rules, and then already you have that baked in session, introductory section, which could be 0.5 or just 1 or what have you, depending on both the system and the group of people that are going to sit down, right? You can actually write that in. It's like, okay, ask questions about your character, your players. Oh, this is a vampire game. what do you think of vampires? Well, I think of vampire as this. Okay, cool. Well, here's a task list that says, well, if you're gonna be this type of vampire, check this checklist. And everybody's like, oh, they did that. Okay, so there's that vampire does that. Do I want to be like that, or gonna be something else, right? And you can actually write that in, right? Could be checklists, it could be a series of questions, etc.
Well,
You can actually
the thing I want to get at here, I'm agreeing with you on this, but the issue is like filling out this huge form in advance that nobody reads. It's like, like the purpose of the session is that we talk about it with each other. So I'm with you on that. But the reason why I'm always against session 0 is because we should be doing this more than once. I mean, I think we all agree that not only should that be built into the game, but we shouldn't fire and forget. We shouldn't do it once and never talk about it.
We should communicate.
We agree on that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the we all agree we should do some planning. We're also agreeing that you don't just do this once.
No, I guess again, and that should be part of the rules. Like this is literally the word introduction. I think would be the key. This is an introduction to something you're going to keep on doing over the length that you wish to play this game, right? Whether it's one session, one shot, or a campaign, or you spend 15 years doing this your premier game that you play. Whatever it is, this is the beginning, and it includes the designer. You have to get through these things in order to.
We have to get to season 2 before it gets any good.
Exactly.
What about you, Griffin?
What about me? Let's see. What I'm thinking is, I'm suddenly thinking, just as a wrap-up thought, from the GM perspective, why the GM would want to personally stall out and have a session 0. And the answer is because you're not prepared at all, are you? You had nothing planned and you need another week, and that's why it's a session 0. Don't lie to yourself.
That is the
there
best.
You go.
I'm glad you saved that. That is the best justification to ask people what the hell they want.
Can I?
Right.
Yeah.
Can I add something onto that too, though? Because
absolutely.
Been there totally. I'll say one thing that I think is good about a session 0 that was not touched on is when you don't know who you're playing with, and again, ideally, as a GM, the rules should handle this part, but ultimately, you don't. When you're playing with strangers on the internet, you really don't know, and if you can. A session 0 could give you the opportunity to plan a game that's going to be more fun for the people you're playing with than otherwise. So that's my last point in favor.
I think my advice would be, if you want to shoot for the 0.5 instead of the pure 0, get better at doing one-shots. Create something completely self-contained, have it ready. It can be 1 page long, slap it down on the table and do it. It doesn't matter how it goes, you still did it.
In my social feeds, people were bringing out the innkeeper hiring you to clean the monsters out of his basement, which is a ridiculous scenario. But on the other hand, it's like, look, like instead of, you're absolutely right. Instead of like, okay, let's make the first adventure we all go on the pilot and make it really short and really sweet so we can see who the hell you people are. Rather than what I would point out is the danger of the session 0, which is to spend a lot of time planning, hearing out everybody's thoughts, dreams, and goals, and then planning something incredibly lofty. So by the time you get to the first session, you've got this huge campaign mapped out before you and everyone's exhausted. And then you discover early on that you don't have the right chemistry. So I think we're all in agreement on that like we should hear each other out and then we should experience it. Let's just try to, don't overplan, don't overthink it. I think we're all on the same page there. So I agree.
That's probably a good way to end it. Don't overthink it. So I'll go ahead and let me scroll up my notes. There we go. So that's all for today for Notes from the Aleph. So we stream episodes bi-weekly Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can come join us live at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games at the same channel, and you can come join us when we start around 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norm Rafferty here is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com and join us on the Reddit and Twitter. And check out the Ironclaw Book of Quarrels expansion book coming out soon. Don't forget to check out RedRabbit and book him for a game over on startplayinggames.com as RedRabbit. And don't forget to see our friend Lessons Learned over at his channel on Twitch and over on YouTube as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And of course, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. So until next time, everybody.
Bye.